This is Griff Ruby with part 33 of my series, Ecclesiology for Sedevacantists, based on Dogmatic Theology, Volume 2, Christ's Church, by Msgr G. Van Noort. Continuing on page 110 where we left off, regarding the infallibility of the Church as a property of the Church. Proposition 2. The secondary object of infallibility comprises all those matters which are so closely connected with the revealed deposit that revelation itself would be imperiled unless an absolutely certain decision could be made about them. The charism of infallibility was bestowed upon the Church so that the latter could piously safeguard and confidently explain the deposit of Christian revelation, and thus could be in all ages the teacher of Christian truth and of the Christian way of life. But if the Church is to fulfill this purpose, it must be infallible in its judgment of doctrines and facts which, even though not revealed, are so intimately connected with revelation that any error or doubt about them would constitute a peril to the faith. Furthermore, the Church must be infallible not only when it issues a formal decree, but also when it performs some action which, for all practical purposes, is the equivalent of a doctrinal definition. Wow, think of some of those public acts of the Novus Ordo leaders and representatives that they've done. They don't qualify at all. One can easily see why matters connected with revelation are called the secondary object of infallibility. Doctrinal authority and infallibility were given to the Church's ruler that they might safeguard and confidently explain the deposit of Christian revelation. That is why the chief object of infallibility, that, namely, by its very nature falls within the scope of infallibility, includes only the truths contained in the actual deposit of revelation. Allied matters, on the other hand, which are not in the actual deposit, but contribute to its safeguard and security, come within the purview of infallibility not by their very nature, but rather by reason of the revealed truth to which they are annexed. As a result, infallibility embraces them only secondarily. It follows that when the Church passes judgment on matters of this sort, it is only infallible insofar as they are connected with revelation. When theologians go on to break up the general statement of this thesis into its component parts, they teach that the following individual matters belong to the secondary object of infallibility. 1. Theological conclusions. 2. Dogmatic facts. 3. The general discipline of the Church. 4. Approval of religious orders. 5. Canonization of saints. Assertion 1. The Church's infallibility extends to theological conclusions. This proposition is theologically certain. A theological conclusion is a proposition which, by genuinely discursive reasoning, is deduced with certainty from two premises, one of which is formally revealed, the other known with natural certitude. It can be strictly a matter of intellectual knowledge, like the fact that the Son proceeds from the Father by a process of intellectual generation, or it can be a matter of practical knowledge, like the fact that one may not directly abort a fetus to save the life of the mother. To assert that the Church is infallible in decreeing these conclusions is to affirm implicitly that it is infallible in rejecting errors opposed thereto. The principle is the same for both. Proof. 1. From the purpose of infallibility, the Church is infallible in matters so closely connected with revelation that any error in these matters would constitute a peril to the faith. But theological conclusions are matters of this type. The conclusion is obvious, major. It is evident from Christ's promises that the teaching office of the Church was endowed with infallibility so that it might be able to carry out its mission properly, to safeguard reverently, explain confidently, and defend effectively the deposit of faith. But the realization of this purpose demands the extension of infallibility to related matters in the sense explained above. Here is the reason. The security of the deposit requires the effective warding off or elimination of all error which may be opposed to it, even though only indirectly. This would be simply impossible without infallibility in related matters. If the Church were infallible only in the field of revealed truth, and not in that of matters annexed thereto. It would be like a general who was assigned to defend a city, but was given no authority to build up defenses or to destroy the material which the enemy had assembled. It would be like a caretaker to whom the master of the house had said, "Take care that my house doesn't burn down, but don't put out any flames as long as they remain merely nearby." Minor. Every conclusion is so connected with its premises that a denial of the conclusion involves necessarily the denial of at least one of those premises. Now, one of the premises upon which every theological conclusion rests is a truth evident from reason, and since no one can very well deny such a premise, there is a danger that an error in the conclusion may give rise to an error about the revealed premise. From the mind of the Church surely makes no mistake when it determines the force and extent of its infallibility, for the greatest of harm would result if the Church, by stretching infallibility beyond its limits, could force everyone to give unqualified assent to a matter about which it is liable to be mistaken. But the fact is that the Church has often and openly expressed its conviction of being infallible in the matter of theological conclusions. It has expressed this conviction, at least in an active, practical way, by irrevocably repudiating doctrines which, while not directly opposed to revealed truths, are opposed to theological conclusions. I think we can go for assertion 2 here. Assertion 2. The Church's infallibility extends to dogmatic facts. This proposition is theologically certain. A dogmatic fact is a fact not contained in the sources of revelation, on the admission of which depends the knowledge or certainty of a dogma or a revealed truth. The following questions are concerned with dogmatic facts. Was the Vatican Council a legitimate ecumenical council? I mean Vatican I, of course, here. Is the Latin Vulgate a substantially faithful translation of the original books of the Bible? Was Pius XII legitimately elected Bishop of Rome? One can readily see that on these facts hang the questions of whether the decrees of the Vatican Council are infallible, whether the Vulgate is truly sacred scripture, whether Pius XII is to be recognized as the supreme ruler of the universal church. From the time of the Jansenist controversies, theologians have understood by the term dogmatic fact especially the following question: is such and such a doctrine, orthodox or heretical, really contained in such and such a book? The Jansenists, in fact, admitted the Church's infallibility in a question of rite or of dogma, i.e., the Church could decide whether this or that doctrine, considered in itself and prescinding from the book in which it was said to be expressed, was heretical. But at the same time, they denied its infallibility in a question of fact, e.g., whether this heretical doctrine was really stated in such and such a book, as, for example, Jansen's Augustinus. One can readily see that a determination of this fact would determine whether one could or could not maintain and defend the doctrine of this book. I think in part 34 we will continue with the proof of that, and then we'll move on to the next part.